Howdy, everybody. As folks are connecting to audio, we'll wait just one more minute for folks. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the waiting room here, but we'll also jump right in because we have only 1 hour with these two masterminds of the greatest game. And so I want to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Beth. I'm the events manager here at Main Street Books. And on behalf of Ada and the staff, it's my great joy to welcome you this Thursday evening to our virtual gathering space to celebrate the Baseball 100, which, you know, if I lift my weights, this book is an incredible achievement, an incredible accomplishment. Even if you are not a baseball person, it's such a delightful, wonderful read and must have just taken an incredible amount of effort and a true passion for this game. So we're so excited here tonight to have two guests with us. And the first is our conversation partner. He is legendary around these parts. His is the most famous mustache east of the Mississippi. We have former Davidson baseball coach Dick Cooke, who finished up his career as head coach after 28 incredible seasons in May of 2018. He still works at the college in the athletics department as the associate director of athletics. He is the winningest coach in Davidson baseball history with 601 wins. And of course, one of the most exciting seasons was after the switch to the Atlantic 10 Conference when he led the Wildcats to their first conference championship and a storied run in the NCAA tournament in 2017. Dick lives right here in town with his family. His youngest child, I just learned, is a senior in college, which makes me feel incredibly old. But we're so happy to have you here tonight with us, Coach Cooke. Welcome.
I'm honored to be a part of this, and I can't wait to learn more about all the content in the book.
Yes, and we will be learning that from the one and only Joe Posnanski. He is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 6 books, including Paterno and The Secret of Golf. He has written for numerous publications, is often regarded one of the finest sports writers of our time. He currently writes at his own website, joeposnansky.com. And he's been named National Sports Writer of the Year by 5 different organizations. He's also won 2 Emmy Awards. And what's really fun for us, because he has promised that he might come up to the shop to sign some copies, he lives right down the road from us in Charlotte, North Carolina. So Joe, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Dick.
Well, thank you very much, and I was very excited to have this opportunity to visit with Joe. And the one thing is, I was looking at the concept of the Baseball 100. If the Red Sox had not been so short-sighted almost 40 years ago in spring training when they released me, perhaps this could be Joe talking to one of the 100. But because they decided to go another route, here we are. But I'm thrilled to be here. I've talked to a number of folks leading up to this who are, I think, with us, and I can see a couple up there, Brian Heil and Dave Fleming and Rick Benders and my wife Susan and a lot of others who are going to be really anxious to get some of the information and anxious to see your all's questions, and we'll talk away. The first thing I want to ask you, Joe, is how long did this take you to put together? When did you start to think about this concept?
Yeah, it's a somewhat complicated answer that I should have a much more direct and short answer to this. But so the original idea to do some sort of list, some sort of countdown of the 100 greatest players was probably about a decade ago, even maybe even more. And it was when I was writing, I was working at the time for Sports Illustrated, and I was doing my own blog as I am now, but then it was sort of a side project. And I just thought one day, it'd be fun to count down the 100 greatest players ever. I like lists. A lot of people like lists. I think it'd be just fun to do it. And I was literally, that's all I wanted to do. I came up with a little statistical formula that I liked, and I had this list, and I said, okay, I'm going to just put out this list every day. I'm going to write a little something about each player, and that was going to be it. And what happened was I started doing it, and I realized that I literally could not just write a few words about each player. I just could not do it. It was, and maybe it's something wrong with me. I don't know, but I would like start writing, and I just would keep writing and keep writing. And this thing started eating me out of house and home. It was literally taking up my whole life. And like, I had a job, I had like, my girls were young then. And it's like, I can't spend 18 hours a day writing this crazy side project. So I actually stopped in the middle. I stopped at like number 30. I stopped multiple times during the process, but eventually stopped at like number 30, and had people like very angry at me, rightfully so. They're like, well, wait, I followed the first. What do you mean you're stopping? And I just, well, look, it was free. So, I mean, I'll give you a full refund, but I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it. And I tried it again about 5 years later, same situation, same thing. I didn't even make it very far at all. I just am like this. I can't do it. It's such a big project. I have such love for these players, and I have so much I want to say. And what happened was 2 years ago now, about a year and a half ago, I guess, I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually write it. And I was working for The Athletic at the time. And I said, this is going to be it. I'm not going to do literally anything else. I'm going to just do this thing. And I said, and in order to make sure I get to the end, I'm going to do 100 essays in 100 days. I'm going to literally write this thing in 100 days. And that's how we got here. I mean, that was literally, it ended up being a little more than 100 days because COVID happened and things got stretched out a little bit. But essentially, I wrote this thing in like 4 months, 3.5, 4 months. But of course, it's 10 years, right? So it's like, oh, you wrote it in 4 months. But of course, it was all of the years and years of work and pulling from all of these different things I had done. And who we are. And it is heavy, by the way. Beth is 100% right. It is a book that you can use as a stepladder. I mean, it's like there are multiple purposes. I've actually been told it's exactly the right width to like put your computer on when you're doing like a Zoom call. So yeah, it's a multi-purpose book, but it is it's big.
Well, and I've read a decent portion of it, and it's, to pull that off is amazing, because it's not just spitting out stats. And here's why Cal Ripken should be in there. He played this many games, he hit this and hit that many home runs. I mean, you get into some really cool nuances about, and a number of them, you don't even get right to the player for a while, because there's another topic, and it's so engaging. And so makes that time frame even more impressive.
Thank you.
For me.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, Dick, honestly, you know this because you've been around the game your whole life. What I wanted this book to be was, like, of course it's a ranking, and of course you have the 100 players and you're telling their stories. But I really did want this to be kind of a love letter to baseball. I wanted this to be why I love the game through the 100 greatest players ever. And so, yeah, so like the Burt Blyleven essay, for instance, Burt Blyleven's on this list, and honestly, somebody might go, what the heck is Burt Blyleven doing on this list? And if you're looking for the answer to that, you're probably not going to find that in that essay, because the essay is like about baseball cards. I wrote, like, most of the essay is about baseball cards. So that's what I wanted to do, was sort of build, I wanted to build this whole sort of larger thing, right? This larger idea of baseball and why it's great and why we love it. And I felt like, hey, I can tell that through the story of Chipper Jones and his dad. I can tell it through the story of these great Negro leaguers who are in here. I can tell it through the story of Jackie Robinson. I can tell it through the story of Henry Aaron. And so that was the big idea. And so, yeah, I mean, that the one thing this book is not, and that to some people might miss it, is it's not like you'll see number 78, whoever that is, and say, okay, and the essay is like, okay, this is why this person is at number 78. This is why this person is not ahead of this person, but behind this person. There's none of that in this book. The rankings are the rankings, and then the essays are like something else.
Okay, and if you don't want to tell the secret, but I loved your number 56, who that is and why. Are you okay sharing that, or do you want people to wait and get the book?
No. I hope people will get the book, but yes, I am okay sharing that. That one, so there are any number of players in this book who are not ranked so much as they are connected to a number that I feel is magical for that person. And, I started doing this. And by the way, that gets very addictive after a little while, because you're like, oh, this is really great. It's really fun to do it this way. And what you do is, like, number 86 is Gary Carter for the 1986 Mets. Like, that's, so I literally, did it like that. And what you find when you're doing a ranking like this is, let's be realistic. There's no difference between number 43 and 37 and 31 and 56. Like, all these players are so great. You can put them in any order, and you can make the strong argument. I felt like that there was a certain kind of player who was so good that they deserved something more than a ranking. They deserved like their own number. So 56 is Joe Dimaggio because of the 56 game hitting streak. And that one particularly stands out because most of the others, like Tom Seaver is 41, his number, and Greg Maddux is 31, his number. Like, there's certain ones that are like that. Dimaggio was the only one I had to move a little bit. He would have been, quite a bit higher than 56 had I just done a straight computer ranking. But I thought, when I see the number 56, like if I'm in a grocery store and the thing is like $7.56, 56, I see it, I immediately think of Dimaggio. Like, that's the first thing that comes to mind. So I thought, like, the greatest honor I could give Joe Dimaggio in this book, he's not number one. The greatest honor I can give him in this book is to give him number 56.
Great. Were there any, outside of the baseball abilities, any non-traditional characteristics of the individuals you looked for, or that jumped out at you, that this guy might not quite be there ability-wise, but because of this factor or that factor, I'm going to slide him in there?
Yeah, I think so. I think that ability and statistics so let me give you sort of a quick rundown of how this list came to be. It started purely as a statistical exercise. I have a friend named Tom Tango who invented the statistic that a lot of people know called wins above replacement. And Tom and I, mostly Tom, he's the math guy, I came up with an idea of what I wanted for a formula. Okay, I want you to give me a formula of the greatest players ever based on these criteria. How great they were against players in their own time. I wanted well-rounded players. I wanted players who had a great peak versus players who might have been very good for a long time, things like that. And he came up with this really wonderful formula, and he spit out 1,000 players. And I looked at those and I loved that list. I thought that list was great. And that's where it started. And this list, this 100, barely resembles that list. Most of the same players are on it, but It doesn't really resemble that list. And that's because, one, there are Negro Leagues players on this list. And of course, there's no statistical bearing for them. There's a Japanese player on this list, same thing, where the stats are not as easy to figure out. But also, then it was a matter of, Sandy Koufax is here on the numbers. I can tell you that when it spit out the formula, Sandy Koufax was not in the top 100 because his career was very short and all of that. But there was no way I was going to do 100 without Sandy Koufax in it, right? So yes, then you start thinking about dominance. You start thinking about postseason play. You start thinking about somebody you could just rely on and to be a star every single year, the guy that you would want to give the ball to in game 7, all of these things that so well. And so yes, I definitely put a lot of non-statistical thought into every one of the rankings. On the other side, I did not let some of the sort of really negative things about players, whether it's steroids or gambling or some of these other things, that didn't eliminate players for me. So that's probably will come up again. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I thought about it.
So you got a Beltran in there, and a Verlander. I mean, my summer with him as a rising college junior.
So awesome. So and I talk about his college, right? I mean, because
he played for a very, very good friend of mine at Old Dominion, and the first we had 36 players in Arizona. We're going to select 24 to go travel for the summer, and he was one of the one, and he was an important pitcher, but he wasn't the guy yet, right? So we're having an inter squad game out there. And he comes up to me and goes, "Coach, you going to call pitches tonight?" I went, "No, it's an inter squad game." He goes, "But you've got to call pitches." I'm like, well, what do you do with Guz, Coach Guzzo at Old Dominion? Because I just throw whatever they tell me to put down. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I'll call pitches. So I talked to the catcher. I said, "Look at me," and I'll pretend, and he'll think it's coming from me. And so he made the club and stayed with and pitched well for us that summer, and obviously jumped. And now he's as I would say, he's matured well as a pitcher. And
yeah, he's done all right for himself.
Yeah,
he really has.
So I opened the book. I see, holy cow, Verlander's in here. Was it hard? Did it surprise you that more recent players jumped into this list?
It didn't surprise me, but only because I specifically created the formula so that so recent players would. Here's a very interesting thing to me about baseball. In football, I see my good friend Dave Fleming out there, and he can tell you this. Everybody believes that the best players are playing now. I mean, yes, there's still a lot of love for Jim Brown or John Unitas maybe, and then Montana, if you want to go, which is not that recent, but not that long ago. But nobody's calling Sammy Baugh or Don Hudson the greatest player who ever lived, right? Nobody does it in basketball, right? Nobody, I just saw that the 75 came out, and like everybody in basketball on that list, something like 60 of them have played in the last 2 decades or whatever. But in baseball, it's always these guys who are 100 years ago. It's all Walter Johnson and Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and Honus Wagner and Rogers Hornsby and Tris Speaker and Ty Cobb and I just listed off 8 right off the top of my head that literally played 100 years ago. So I think baseball has sort of an anti-recency bias. Like it's like anybody who played recently, it's like whatever, they're fine, but they're not like the old days, like the really good old days. And I think baseball is just sort of geared that way. So it was very important for me to that the recent years and particularly players who are playing now were well represented. And there are actually a couple of players who just missed this list who are active right now, who I wish I could have gotten on there, because I do believe that the baseball that is being played right now is pretty great. I mean, it's definitely different than it's ever been, but these athletes are incredible. They're just incredible players.
Well, and I think I agree. And the athleticism's impressive, a little different than, 1982 Red Sox time. But I think it's good that baseball holds on to that sense of history or the old guys, because I think it forces people to think about the history of the game and develop some knowledge of that history, which is I know a lot about players from the 40s, and I was born in 1956 because it was thrown at me a lot. It was available to me. There's a couple good questions jumping in here. Let me jump to this one in particular. Have you been collecting these stories about the players all your life?
Yes. Okay. So that's probably, again, another 2-part answer. Yes. A lot of these stories, the way I would do these essays was the player would come up. I had the list, and eventually I had to stop fiddling with the list, right? Eventually, because I could have just kept moving players around all day and all night. Eventually I said, okay, that's it. That's my 100. So now I'm just going to write. And when I came to Carlton Fisk, or I came to Tony Gwynn, most of these players, as soon as I came to the player, I had an idea in my mind where I was going to start. Like I usually, for most of these people, I had some interaction with them, or I'd heard some story about them, or I just kind of had something about them that I was curious about. So a lot of it is started with things I already knew, but I have to say, just about every essay, probably there's not even just about every essay, there are stories and anecdotes and quotes and things that I did not know before coming in. Every one of them, I went into a sort of a deep dive, one day research frenzy where I got their book and I scanned it and tried to read everything I could about it, went to the newspapers and read everything I could, found key dates in their careers, and went back to see what people were saying about it, when they were drafted or when they came to the big leagues or when they had their big moment or whatever. And, I found something really cool about every single player. And a lot of them, I found stuff that completely changed my mind about what the essay was going to look like. So yes, I did have a lot of these stories collected. And sometimes stuff would just come in my mind. Like I think about the Gaylord Perry one. I've had a lot of people come up to me about, Gaylord, of course, North Carolina guy. And there's a single stat in there that the essay was done and I was getting ready to go. And I'm like, wait a minute, I think I remember this. There was a single day when Gaylord Perry and his brother Jim Perry had the exact same record. Like literally they were both 214 and 178 or something, literally exactly the same record for one day. And I just thought, oh my gosh, and I looked it up and of course it was true. And it was like, and I found the dates and I found the game and I'm like, okay, well, that's awesome. That's right. Baseball at its heart. So a lot of stuff I just found, as I was going, for sure.
Again, I think that's something unique to baseball too. I think the pace of the game allows those type of stories to really gain some momentum and some have a little bit of legs to them a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything in any other sport like something as obscure and weird as the fact that Stan Musial had the same number of hits at home and on the road, right? Like, so he had 1,815 hits at home and 1,815 hits on the road. And it doesn't mean anything, right? It's like a weird stat that does, but yet it kind of means everything. It kind of tells you who that guy was and how, he was Stan Musial every single day of his career. And it didn't matter where he played, he hit. And so it's like, it tells you everything, but like, there's no football or basketball equivalent to that, like some weird thing. Baseball the baseball stats and baseball history is just more ingrained in the game, I think, than it is in any other sport.
I think we all, as former players, we all remember, I'm sure this happens in every sport, but I gotta believe it happens more in baseball, where I remember the grand slam I gave up to Harry Parker playing for Highway 35 lanes when I was 12 years old, like I threw the pitch yesterday. And I'm sure my wife is rolling her eyes because that's the 50th time she's heard me mention that story, but it's just something that stays with you in baseball. And I think it kind of, it goes into the history of the game. I don't know, it's a really unique part of it. So we got a question here from Rick Bender, former great shortstop at Davidson College, was our sports information director after being an assistant coach here, now the sports information director at Dartmouth, who has the book and is going to give it to his dad for his birthday, I believe. Awesome. And he says, having read the essays on the Athletic site as they came out, did you add more content to the book? The essays themselves certainly are more than enough for a book.
Yes. So these did run in some form on the Athletic, and the idea was, look, it's plenty long enough. I think the idea was like, okay, just run those essays. I don't need to do any more work. Dave Fleming out there can tell you it's hard writing a book. It's, it's like, hey, if the work's done, the work's done, and then, the Avid Reader Press, Simon & Schuster, bought the book and said, okay, we love this. Here you go, do whatever it is you're going to do with it. And they gave me, the manuscript to work with. And I literally rewrote every essay. I mean, because again, I have like a sickness with this kind of thing, but also being fair to me, as fair to me as I can be. The essay, and look, and it might not be something people notice. Like most people, no, I read that because it's similar to the essays that they read online. But when you're writing it online, there is like a daily feel, like the news of the day will seep in there, or you'll make some reference that made sense, in the moment and doesn't make any sense later. There might be like an early Ted Lasso reference or something, and people are like, wait a minute, that was like 2 seasons ago or whatever. And so I rewrote every essay, and I did add quite a bit of stuff. And of course, there's a new introduction. Well, not new. There was no introduction before. There's an introduction that I wrote. George Will wrote an introduction to this book, which is really weird. So I do want to say something about George Will, because I don't know George Will. I do a little bit now, but I didn't know George Will. I'd never met him. I had no interaction with him whatsoever. Of course, knew him and knew the legend and the all of that. One day, I'm probably about 25 or 30 essays into the book, I get an email from George Will's assistant saying George wants to talk to you, and I thought, well, that's really weird, but okay. And so I said, yes, of course, please. And he sent me an email. He didn't want to talk to me. He just wanted to send me an email. And he sent me an email and it said, Joe, these essays are amazing. You need to turn this into a book. And I thought, well, that was really nice. That was really nice of George Will to say that. And then like 3 or 4 weeks later, I get another one. Now I'm getting an email directly from George Will saying, Joe, I'm completely serious. You've got to turn this into a book. If you need me to introduce you to any publishers, you need me to do any work on my end, I'm happy to do it, but you've got to make this a book. And, and I was like, thank you. I have a publisher, but I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Thank you, though. That was very nice of you to say that. And then like a month later, I get another email from George Will basically saying, if you don't turn this into a book, I'm going to kick your butt. Like literally, those were the words of the erudite George Will, was him threatening to kick my butt if I didn't make this a book. So at that point, I was like, oh, George Will wants it to be a book. And so I emailed him and I said, look, if I turn it into a book, will you write the introduction? And he was like, absolutely, I will. And he wrote this very glowing, lovely introduction to this book. Really good. Yeah, so it's, I don't know, this thing has been charmed from the start. It's really been strange.
That same assistant, I'm going to say, if I started here in 91, I'm going to say 1992 or 3, had a message from George Will's assistant, wanted to talk to me about his son, a potential college baseball player.
Oh, wow.
But either the son went on to the big leagues or stopped playing because they were not as persistent in calling me back as they were with you. So I don't know if we missed on a shortstop that would have replaced Rick Bender, or if they just moved on to other passages. Who was in the NCAA basketball tournament, they talk about last one in, who was the last one in for you?
Well, number 100.
You reference in the book, you don't want to talk about who you left out because you got another book coming, but.
Right. Yeah. For the baseball 200. No, look, number 100 is Ichiro. But I can tell you that Ichiro was not necessarily the last one in. It's like that's just
been reading it. I'm thinking he was kind of in there pretty good.
Yeah, Ichiro was going to be in this book. So I will tell you who the last one out was, just because I have mentioned this, and there's a specific reason I'll tell you. It's because there are a number of Negro Leagues players in this book, and they were as important to me to writing this book as anything that I did. It was this book would not exist if I did not have the Negro League players in there. That was very much a part of the mission. And it's not only to have the greatest Negro League players that everybody knows, Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell, which most baseball fans know. It was also to have a bunch of Negro Leagues players who fans might not know, like Bullet Rogan or Pop Lloyd, or even Oscar Charleston, who is actually, I will tell you, number 5 in this book. I've been stunned how many people have come up to me and said, I loved your Oscar Charleston chapter. I had never heard of him. So I was surprised and thrilled that I could introduce them to one of the greatest players who ever lived. So number 101 is a Negro Leagues player, and it's a guy named Turkey Stearns, who was a great Negro Leagues player in Detroit in the early 30s all the way through into the early 40s, and may have even played in the 20s. Great player. They called him Turkey because he ran like a turkey, apparently, with his arms flapping around. He was like an odd, interesting guy who used to talk to his bats after like games. Like he would, if he had like a warning track fly ball, he would yell at the bat and say that the bat wasn't strong enough. And like he was an interesting guy, but he was a great hitter and a great power hitter at the time. Really idolized in the same way that Josh Gibson would later be idolized. I mean, hit as many home runs as anybody of his time. So he was a guy that just missed. And if I could have had a 101, he would have been it. So that's that I can say. There are a bunch of guys. I will tell you that the last 10 in this book, 91 through 100, there were 40 candidates for those 10 spots. I mean, I literally had a list of 40 players, and I would mix and match and put, probably every one of those 40 at some point or another were in the final 10, but eventually I had to stop shuffling them around, and it ended up being what it ended up being.
That's great. Are there current players now who obviously most are not in there, who, if you're going to crystal ball it and you're in another 20 years, you're going to write the next, which guy's knocking around now do you see being in this type of a book?
Well, there are a bunch of guys. There are some guys that just missed, and I'll mention a couple of them. Zach Grenke was a guy who really, really came close, and we're now sort of seeing the end of Zach's career. I've been lucky enough to have been there from the beginning. I was in Kansas City when Zach was drafted by the Royals and spent the early years, and he quit baseball for a while because of his social anxiety, and he's been an amazing pitcher that has probably never gotten his due. The other current player that I really would love to put in, and maybe if this book had been written a year later, I would have put in, is Joey Votto of the Cincinnati Reds. And that is not entirely because Joey Votto has screamed at me for not being in the book. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only reason. That I think he's a big guy. So I don't know if Joey, I think he had such a great year this year. He was so close already, and then he had such a great year this year. It might have put him over the top. But I think the question you're asking about some of the younger players, and there are several younger players who I definitely could see on this list, and pretty high on this list in 10 years or 15 years. But the one that I'm keeping the most eye on is a guy that because you spent some time with him when he was a hitting instructor with the Red Sox. Is Juan Soto of the Washington Nationals, who I do believe is kind of the modern day Ted Williams. I mean, when you watch him play, in a time where everybody strikes out, this guy walks twice as often as he strikes out. Great power, just brings this level of joy to the game. An incredible hitter. I think sky's the limit. I don't think there's any number he could not reach in his career if he keeps going the way he's going.
So with the sort of a follow-up, but more of a follow-up of the nature of the game now, with the way pitching staffs are managed / mismanaged, managed differently, however you want to say that.
Yeah.
Is it going to be tougher for pitchers to have this type of reputation down the road? You're going to be fewer, no 300 inning guys. You're not going to have 300 win guys.
Yeah. I mean, the game is totally shifted so that, the other day, Eduardo Rodriguez of the Boston Red Sox threw 6 innings and gave up 3 runs, a 3-run homer. He gave up 3 runs. and you would have thought they were ready to put him in the Baseball Hall of Fame for doing that. You know, I mean, that used to be a bad outing for Tom Seaver or whatever. The game is just so different, though. The hitters are so different. The lineups are so much more stacked top to bottom. I don't know how the pitcher thing is going to shake out. Of course, we still have amazing pitchers in the game today. I mean, there are, you mentioned Verlander. I mean, we don't know if we'll see him again, but Max Scherzer is in this list. Clayton Kershaw's in this list. There are a couple of guys that were really close, and you feel there's some young guys, in Milwaukee and Atlanta, San Francisco. There's some young guys that look like they're really good. I don't know what a great pitcher looks like in 2025, for instance, right? Is a great pitcher a guy that throws 160 innings and has a 1.28 ERA? Is that where we're going, or is it, or do we come back to a point where there are going to be some pitchers who are going to stretch out and throw 225, 250 innings? And, it's hard to tell, but you're right. I mean, the way that we used to measure pitchers doesn't make sense anymore, right? Like, so if you hear somebody, I mean, we have guys who have 10-10 records who win the Cy Young. I mean, we're just in a different era when it comes to pitchers. And I think that's a lot of that stuff still has to shake out for sure.
First decision in professional baseball. I was with the Winston-Salem Red Sox in 1979. We're playing the Peninsula Pilots, a Philly farm club. 15 inning game. And I wasn't, the front end of the bullpen, or, I wasn't the first guy out, but 15 inning game. I come in to start the 14th inning. It's tied 3-3. Get through that inning fine. Bottom of the 15th, leadoff double to Bob Denier, who wound up with a good big league career, barely stayed in the park. They bunt on the third. On the third, which you never do anymore, but they bunt on the third.
Bob is fast.
So we intentionally walked the next two hitters. And Tom Lombarski's up, left-handed hitter. Not that we remember these kind of details. I throw him a fastball in, a great fastball in, jam him, hits a little three-hopper to the shortstop, Noel Roman, who picks it up, steps on the bag, and throws the ball into the stands. Ball game's over, bus leaves in 20 minutes, Cook's 0-1. So that's interesting to me because that was my decision, or my parents still have the box score around. If you look at that today, 15 inning game, you're going to see 9 pitchers listed in the Red Sox. And that one, it was Howard 13,
right?
Cook 1.1,
right?
Our starter went 13 innings and this was like a August 2nd game in the Carolina League. Yeah. And our manager told all of us, Mike was unbelievable that summer. He said, he could be pitching in the big leagues right now. And Bill Slack, our manager, one of the greatest baseball people I've ever known. And we didn't think that was odd to pitch 13. We were impressed that he did. His arm went south on him a couple of years later. He never had the big league career he thought he was going to have that night. But I still have a copy of the box score from my parents when they had that scrapbook. And I still chuckle at that. You're getting hey, that's not going to happen anymore. And not that shouldn't have happened then, but I'm hoping we don't go too much the other direction where we're going to throw a game with 9 openers. I don't want that.
We're close to that now. I mean, especially in the postseason. It's not as bad in the regular season, but in the postseason, we had it was a record 9 pitchers in an 8-inning game the other day, and I don't think that's good for the game. I really don't. I mean, I think the game has to evolve. We all know that it's different. I went back and looked at Koufax's Game 7 against the Minnesota Twins, where he threw the shutout to, one of the most legendary performances ever by one of the most legendary guys ever. And you looked at that Twins lineup and you're like, there are like 5 guys in here who are pitchers, basically. I mean, it's like, there were a bunch of guys who couldn't hit. And you got through Oliva and Killebrew and you were probably okay. And that's not the case anymore. So it is different now, but there was a moment in last night's game, I think it was the Astros. No, it might've been the Dodgers game. I can't even remember, but it was like 6th inning or something. And they were down pretty big. They were down 4 runs, maybe 4 or 5 runs, 2 outs. And they went out and they pulled the pitcher, and it was like, why? There's nobody even on base. There was like nobody on base, and they were down 5 runs already, and it was 2 outs. Just that's where I think the game has gone too far already, and I think they should do something about it. And I don't know exactly what that is, but I do think they should do something about it.
It's to me very, again, we've all managed people differently. We talk about our run in 17 to the postseason. I don't know if he's on the call. Darren Olinger pitched for us, and I absolutely abused him for about a week and a half. But that was fine. That was the right thing to do. But it's at a point now where you're exposing your relievers more and more. You're expecting 4 guys to be great every night.
That's right.
And there's certainly times as a coach or a manager when you say, I'm going to start John Smith tonight. And gosh, I hope we get 4 innings out of him. I hope. And then all of a sudden he goes through 4 innings and he's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, nowadays it's get him out, because we can't go through that third time where my instinct would be, well, maybe he can get me 5.
Right.
And suddenly he goes out and he goes a little deeper, and now you're shortening that bullpen, and you don't have to have 4 guys be great every night.
Right.
And that logically makes sense to me. And I know there's a lot of analytics that say differently. And I think when you have a lot of numbers to work with, and that's where your decisions are made, I think it takes a little bit of the heat off you making a bad decision. So if you're going, well, I'm going to make this move personnel wise because this is what the book tells me.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work out, then it's the book's fault. But if I say, I'm not going to go against that, or I'm not going to do that, I'm going to go against conventional wisdom or what that's telling me, and it doesn't work out, then your general manager, your front office is wearing you out.
Yeah, that's right.
I think there's a lot more of the game being controlled from upstairs than we all want to believe too.
Well, I think that's right. All of those things are right. I mean, I think that there's no question that front offices play a much bigger role. There's no question that because these relievers, we know they're not going to go more than 1 inning. They can be max effort, so they're all throwing 97, 98 miles an hour, which gives you, the best shot at whatever. But again, it backfires all the time, and you would probably rather be on the backfire end of the book call, right? The one that everybody, that your front office is happy with, than if you made your own call and went away from it and that backfired. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of safety being played out there in baseball for sure.
It's different, and it's still fun to watch. I mean, when we leave here, I'm going to go back and bear down and sit second guess from the comfort of my living room and my
exactly right.
So a couple of questions coming from a former player, Brian Heil, accomplished, came in as a middle infielder, became an accomplished submarine reliever. The first one I can answer, although it says as a baseball historian, which I'm not, but he's directing that to you. If you're ranking facial hair, would Coach Cook's mustache make the top 100? It's the Cal Ripken of facial hair, showing up to work every day for decades. I've actually had this mustache since 1978, so I've kind of blown Ripken out of the water on that. So yeah, I'm going to answer yes, it would be.
It is. It's behind Jack Morris, but that's it. Yeah, I mean, there's I can't think of any others immediately that are ahead right now.
And his follow-up, and you sort of answered this a little bit. He said, have you heard from any players directly commenting about their ranking or their teammates?
Yes, I have heard from players. I've heard from more players probably who are not on the list, and not in a bad way, not like they're mad, but like really, really great players like Jim Palmer and Dale Murphy and others who are not on this list who were really intrigued by it and wanted to talk about it and all of that. I've heard from several players who are on this list. One of the real sad parts of this list is that I think it was eight players on this list have died since I wrote the essay. Whether it's Bob Gibson or Tom Seaver or Al Kaline or Joe Morgan, Phil Necro, who is just a lovely, lovely person. Several players have died, and obviously I had some real emotion about that. I mean, those were people that I did talk to. I've heard from some very interesting people around baseball about this list. And for a while there, it was getting kind of weird because like every day I would hear from some other like sort of, GM or president or somebody about this list, which was really interesting. I actually heard from, I didn't hear from him, but I guess somebody was doing a podcast with Huey Lewis. I don't need to introduce Huey Lewis. And it was obviously about Huey Lewis and the news and music and whatever. And then I guess in the middle, he just went on this long side note about Willie Mays and Willie Mays being number one on my list. And it was just very weird. But I will tell you my favorite story along those lines.
Was he okay with Willie Mays being one?
He loves him. Willie Mays was his favorite player. Yeah. He was like, that's absolutely right. He's like, and I know there are people out there who say Babe Ruth and they're wrong. I mean, he just went like this whole, it was like, I should have like Huey Lewis in my back pocket, just following me around to like defend my choices. So my favorite moment was, one of my favorite moments was, I had written the number 4 essay on the book. Number 4 on this book is Henry Aaron. And I was having dinner with my family and my phone rings and it's a Milwaukee number. And I am like, I'm not answering. I'm having dinner with my family or whatever. And my wife, Margot, says, go ahead. You want to answer it. Who knows? It might be something. And I pick it up and it was former commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig. Who I do not know. I've obviously talked to him before, but he had to have, I don't know how he found my number. I guess my number's not that hard to find, but he was calling to talk about the Hank Aaron essay that I'd written. He was very, very close. Henry Aaron is another one of the people who has died since I wrote the essay. He was very, very close to Mr. Aaron, and he was calling to tell me that it was like the most beautiful essay that he'd ever read about Hank Aaron. And he went on for like 20 minutes about how much he loved Hank Aaron, how much he loved that essay, how great he thought that it was that I wrote it. And he just went on and on. It was very glowing and very gushing, and it was very, very nice. And I was away from the table, and I kept like going to my wife, like, I'll be right there. I'm listening to Bud Selig tell me how great I am, so I have to stay here for now. And so he just went on and on about how great this was, which was super nice. And then we kind of come to a pause, and I'm like, well, it's so nice of you to call me, Commissioner. And he goes, yeah. One quick question for you. I noticed that Hank Aaron is number 4 on this list. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I think I know who number 1 and number 2 are. But who's number 3 on this list? And I said, well, Commissioner, it's coming out tomorrow, but I will tell you that number 3 is Barry Bonds. And he did not have a single nice thing to say to me after that. Just absolutely like, oh, okay, I got to go. Like he was like, whatever, there simply could not have been an angrier human than Bud Selig was after I told him that I had put Barry Bonds ahead of Hank Aaron. And rightfully so. He had every right to feel that way. And I certainly understand people who do. But yeah, that's one of my favorite moments.
That's great. That's great. One of my good friends, Pat Millen, asked if Gary Carter made the list. May I presume Thurman Munson made the list just ahead of him?
Yeah. Thurman Munson just missed. By the way, I tell every person. So I did this thing for. I should have and would have done this for Main Street Books had the time worked out. I did this thing for an independent bookstore in Kansas City called Rainy Day Books, which is my favorite bookstore besides for Main Street. And it's this wonderful place. And I said, okay, here's the deal. And I did not think it was going to be a big deal. I said, I announced that if anybody pre-ordered the book, I would sign it and I would inscribe it with anything they wanted me to do, literally any inscription they wanted. And I thought, oh, that'll be kind of funny, and we'll get a few people buying the book. So 1,500 people bought the book asking for inscriptions of this thing, which is 1,500 is a lot. 1,500 when this book is 3 pounds, right? So 1,500 copies right there is more than 2 tons of Baseball 100. And so I and people were sending me all kinds of inscriptions, some that were just intended for me to write something that I knew would drive me crazy. I'm a pretty well-known anti-Yankee person, so people had me write like super nice Yankee things, and Derek Jeter I'm in love with him and things like that. Some people had me write like very funny. One of my favorite sort of themes of the writing was where some people would have me write things to their fathers or their girlfriends or their boyfriends or whatever, but in their voice. So I would literally write like, Dad, I remember when I was 9 years old and you took me to the backyard. I'm like, why am I writing this in their book? And, Beth, you have been the light of my life. Like this is really weird. But my favorite ones were people angrily writing in saying, why isn't Thurman Munson on the list? Why isn't Pudge Rodriguez on the list? Why isn't Eddie Murray on the list? Why isn't Ryan Sandberg or Barry Larkin? Or I can give you a long list of people who are not on this list who are great, great players. And every one of them I would write, Thurman Munson just missed, right? Or like Thurman Munson was number 102. It was super close. So there's like 300 books out there with different players who are ranked number 102 in the Baseball 100. So hopefully they never meet each other or they don't ever, put together like a band or something. So yeah, that was very fun.
That's great. Well, having grown up a Yankee fan, but then became a Red Sox fan when they gave me a small paycheck for a while.
Yes.
There are a whole lot of really passionate Thurman Munson people out to this
Oh,
day.
yeah.
I mean,
He's a great player.
Yeah,
he's a great player. And I think that forgetting my book, I think there's a very strong argument for him in the Hall of Fame. I really do. I feel like he was at his best, as good as Fisk, as good as Carter, as good as, not quite as good as Bench, but Bench was a whole other thing. So yeah, I mean, I think Munson was a great player.
Yeah, when I was at the All-Star game with my Ernie Banks picture, we had the Yankee clubhouse as our dressing area for a couple of days while they were out of town. We were doing the Futures game, and I told a buddy of mine, we were in their dressing, and I told a buddy of mine of a Yankee fan. I said, and Munson's locker's right over there, and I mean he wept when I told him. I said, yeah, we're in the Yankee clubhouse, and Thurman's locker's right over there, just the way they set it up. And I was just telling him the story of how it's kind of cool being in there, and he was in tears.
Wow.
Yeah, this was he was not a young guy, and I liked him as a player, but it's really interesting how deep the passion is for him by a lot of people.
It's awesome.
We got time for a couple more. Is there anything else you want to throw out to the crowd? Anything else about?
Yeah. Well, I guess the only things I would say, well, there are a couple of things I would say. One, I'll give you a little. It's in the book, people, if you find it, but I'll give you a little secret ingredient in the book. But I also want to say, and I say this now every time, when you write an 880-page baseball book, you don't expect it to find a particularly big audience, right? I mean, like you're like, there are enough baseball fans out there who are geeky fans like me, and they'll buy this book and it'll be great. The book has had such absurd success. I mean, it's been on the New York Times bestseller list the last couple of weeks. It's sold out all over the place. It's going into its 4th printing now, and I've been trying to figure it out. I mean, I don't know that I care, right? Like, I mean, like what's the reason? Like, I don't know that I really care because it's so great and I appreciate it so much. But I've been trying to figure it out, and I think there's something. First of all, it tells you that people do love this game. I mean, they really do. And you hear so often about baseball and the troubles and the ranking and the ratings, television ratings dropping and this, and that, and the other. And look, baseball does have issues and things that they need to work out, and they do need to reach out to the younger generations and all those things. But people still love this game. And I think people love the fact that this book is completely joyful. I mean, look, there are plenty of, hard stories in here too, right? I mean, you can't write about Ty Cobb or Rogers Hornsby or Pete Rose or Barry Bonds without talking about some negative stuff. But the book is completely joyful. And I think people like that. I think that's sort of, I think that's part of it. I think, when you're looking at the bestseller list and it's a whole lot of rage and anger and tell-alls and everything else, and you have this little baseball one, well, it's not little. You have this baseball 100 book in the middle of it. I think that's what's doing it. So I'll tell you the little secret of this book. I told you that there's like a number thing that I do where players get certain numbers in this book. So if you are shrewd, there's no table of contents in this book. So you have to actually read it in order to get, or at least flip through it in order to get the numbers, right? There are actually, and it's easy to miss this, there are two 20s in this book. There are two players who are 20s in this book. There is Mike Schmidt, who wore number 20, and there's Frank Robinson, who wore number 20. So they're both 20s in this book, and there's no 19. So you got 21, 20, 20, and there's no 19. And the reason there is no 19 in this book is for the Black Sox, the 1919 Black Sox, because Shoeless Joe Jackson is not actually in this book, but I kind of think he is. He's the invisible 19. So, wow. So I just wanted to throw that out to people so that, if you do notice it, I think I mentioned it somewhere in the book. I try to keep the number stuff pretty quiet. I figure it's something that people can sort of discover as they go. But since, nice enough to come out on a Thursday evening, I wanted to give you that little sort of secret thing about this book.
It's great. And my friend Rick Bender just weighed in and said, let's call it the Ted Lasso of books.
Oh, I love that. Yes, I would love to be that.
That's great. Joe, thanks a ton. This has been great. Beth, do you need to jump in and close us up, or are we good?
Only to say thank you both so much for being with us tonight, and to everybody who tuned in. We're so grateful that you tuned in as well. This is our last physical copy in the shop right now, so it could be a race in the morning when we open.
Yes,
to come grab it. But we do have more on order, and we will continue to order. So you can always pre-order through our website or put in your order on our website. I can actually drop that link right into the chat in a moment. And we will be continuing to preach the gospel of the baseball 100 to our readers far and wide.
And Beth, you can tell them, if indeed they would like it autographed, give us a gift for this holiday. I have promised Beth that I will come up and sign copies. So we'll make that work too.
Yay. That's great.
Great. And Joe promised that his next book will start the forward with my Ernie Banks story, which we talked about before we came on the air.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
That is a great story. That's for the Baseball 200.
Yes.
Again, this has been such a joy. Thanks both of you so much, and to all of you for coming. We really appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Great to see a lot of good faces out there.